Okay, in this lesson what we're going to be looking at is Camera Raw. So I have Adobe Bridge open and I have a folder open. What I'm going to do is select all the images, Command A for selecting all. What I'm going to do here is basically make changes to a number of photos all with the same kind of features and at the same time. So you see I have them all selected. I'm going to right click, Open in Camera Raw. Some of you have probably seen this screen before because you shot in Camera Raw, and I at that point told you to just open the image. Camera Raw is a really great tool. Well, first it's an uncompressed file, so it's the largest file that you have when you're shooting uncompressed. So it's the most data of a file. This is the Camera Raw dialog box, and so what I'm going to do here is do a number of changes to several shots at the same time. So if you look at the upper left, you see one shot is selected, and you see right above where the cursor is, select all. So watch what happens when I choose select all. They're all selected. This is a great tool in that it helps you process images more quickly. In other words, you just shot an event and you're trying to turn these shots around quickly. It's not so much as making sure you're doing a perfect print. Maybe you're getting them ready for a web page. Maybe you're preparing them to upload and be printed by another service instead of doing, say, one shot at a time, or like we've been doing all semester, a couple of shots printed per assignment. So this is more of dealing with a large number of images. So I have them all selected, and if you look on the right to the screen, there's a lot of power in this dialog box here in terms of controlling how you're processing your images. We're just going to scratch the surface just to let you know that this is available, and later I'll show you what I typically do after a shoot so that you have some understanding of how this works. So if you look over on the right, you see white balance as shot. Depending on what your white balance setting was when you shot it, you may or may not need to make an adjustment. And this is a really cool thing because white balance, this is as shot. If I click and you see these other choices, auto, custom. So in other words, sometimes I think there was a person or two, they accidentally changed the white balance in their camera and their shots were very blue because of their white balance setting. This is an ideal way to correct a whole bunch of shots at the same time, which is really cool. There's also a white balance tool that I'll show you in a minute, but for now we're going to leave it as shot. I was shooting outside and that was fine. So I'm going to leave it as shot. You can also change the color temperature. You see here, right below where it says white balance, same thing with the tint. I'm not going to touch those. I do ideally want to shoot it right in the first place, but sometimes things, you overlook something and your shots have, obviously not as perfect as you'd like them to be. Below that we have exposure, contrast, highlights, shadows, whites, etc., etc. The things that I typically change in my shots, occasionally my exposure's off by a little bit, as much as I hate to admit that. It does happen once in a while in a complex scene. So I could change, I'll just show you how this works. I will not change the exposure, but if I click and drag on the slider, you see how my shots on the left are getting darker. I'm underexposing those shots by one stop. If I go to the right, I can obviously brighten them up if that's necessary. So you see that that's possible as well. I'm going to put this back on 0, and if I can't quite get it right, I'll just type 0, 0, 0, enter, and you see it bounces back. Contrast you can adjust. Not something I typically do. Same thing with shadows, whites. Ideally we're shooting things right in the first place. But the other thing I typically adjust based on how my camera shoots is I often up my blacks a little bit because right after a shoot my shots are a tiny bit flat. So sometimes I adjust my blacks up a little bit. The other thing that I typically adjust would be my saturation. I typically go somewhere around 8, 10 depending on the shot. What's happened is I've adjusted all of these shots at the same time instead of opening one after the other after the other. And that's really helpful. I just want to go over some of the tools at the top of this Camera Raw dialog box. I'm going to select all the shots because I want to work on this whole batch at the same time. And if you look at these different tools, they are similar to Photoshop tools, but they're just set up a little bit differently. If you forget which tool is which, just like I'm doing right now, I go over and put the cursor over it and it will give you a little pop out and tell you what the tool is. The one I wanted to highlight here is the white balance tool. Sometimes accidentally we change our white balance or we don't set it correctly for our scene. So what we have to do here is make that correction. I have all my shots selected and I have my white balance too. Ideally I want to click on my canvas to try to get a nice tone to my photograph. So if I don't like that, I clicked once and it didn't change that much, I'll make a really bad change. And now you see the color tone is way off. You want to click on a mid-tone or a gray really. And that looks pretty good. So you see off on the right, my white balance now says custom, whereas before it said as shot. I can go back to as shot, or I can go use that white balance tool again, and I can just click and click and click and click until I'm 100% happy. But notice how it's working, changing the white balance of all these shots in this lineup here, which saves me a tremendous amount of time. If you desire, you can use the sliders, as I mentioned before, to change your white balance setting as well. Really quick way to correct any mistakes that you made, or you want to change a lot of shots at the same time, just makes your life a whole lot easier. I'll go back to as shot. I'll get that white balance tool and I'm going for more of a gray. I like my shots a little bit warmer. The other tool at the top here I would like to go over is your cropping tool. Again, I have all these shots selected. This could be an advantage or a disadvantage. Crop tool, I have them all selected. I'm going to do a really bad crop. For now, I'm going to click and hold just to check my sizes. If I go to custom, you do want to set your tool. I'm working in inches just like we do in Photoshop. We make sure it's set to inches and then we put the size that we want. I'm going to say 6x4 and let's just see what we get. So I'm going to click, drag, and if you look to the left, all of a sudden you see all my shots changing. I haven't actually executed this crop yet because I have not double clicked, but I'm going to double click. And so then on the left, if I go and I look, uh-oh, it skewed that one. And it skewed it because of the way I had my tools set. So there's no quick, easy undo like there is in Photoshop, but what I can do is select all of them again, get that crop tool. Now you see it's showing me what I cropped. Well, I don't want to apply that to all the shots, so if I just want to turn this off, if you will, or this cropping adjustment that I did off, I'm going to just press the escape key and now it basically turns that cropping off. This is really helpful when you shoot similar shots, and meaning that they're framed almost the same. A lot of times we shoot more than one shot, right? We take 3 shots to be sure we got the one that we needed. So these 3 shots are pretty similar in terms of framing. So I might do them as a chunk. So I have my crop tool. I'm going to click and drag. And now this will probably be more successful. Double click and now I've locked it in. So if I look on the left and I choose shot by shot, I get to see my new cropping. If you want to remember where it was, select the shot, get your crop tool, and that's the crop that I did. If you don't like it, just turn it off. But now you see I'm turning it off for one shot at a time. Like this one, I cut his feet off. I don't want to do that. So I'll go turn it off. Whereas this one, maybe I'm happy with that crop. It just depends on what you're after. Okay, so that's cropping. It's very helpful. And the white balance tool, I find those tools really, really helpful. Once you're satisfied with what changes you've made, you would say done, and now you're ready to move on to the next step.